Welcome to the riskadvisor.com podcast. I'm Sal LaFreri, and I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Jim Henry. Before we begin, I'd like to remind each of you to subscribe to this show and push the like button for us. Please leave your comments, as your opinion is important to us, and we would love to hear from you. So today we're going to do Series 4 in our Common Sense series, talking about, and we've titled this particular segment is Damned If You Do and Damned If You Don't. And we want to talk about the role of the CEO, especially, and the issues that they're going to face in today's environment. What are some of those things? And I think to start it off, we're going to, let's talk about how the risk profile continues to change. Jim, what do you think?
Well, this slippery slope just continues to get slipperier. Hopefully, after the election, regardless of which side wins, more common sense prevails. But I think that you got to prepare for if that does not happen. And we continue on this crusade by some to defund the police and completely, their term is reimagine security. Well, it's one thing to target, areas in any industry, and that includes law enforcement, that can use, improvement or discipline, for those that disobey protocol. But this is well beyond that. We're seeing the consequences of the feeling of freedom for consequences by the lawless. And, the challenge here is there's a political climate right now by corporations, particularly major corporations, to be kind of going with the flow here, figuring that is the path of least resistance. And it probably is in the short term, but there's a big difference between brick and mortar companies and tech companies. Brick and mortar companies have physical assets and people that that they're responsible to protect.
As compared to a tech company.
As compared to a tech company.
It's all virtual.
It's
all virtual. Yeah.
When this all first started back, I guess really approaching a year ago, the movement of, toward this defunding concept, which previous to this past year would be, unthinkable by anybody on either side of the aisle. And now it just seems to have its own momentum. And, like I say, that you just got to stop and scratch your head and say, this does not pass the litmus test of common sense.
I think we're at a point now where you're right. We've gone so far on both extremes that, something radical needs to happen. And I know I had said this earlier on about having a terrorist attack to kind of wake everybody up. But I think we've gotten to the point now where, especially with the defund the police, and you look at the different, risks that all of that is producing, and they want to have community organizers and they want to have social workers deal with people running around with knives and violent family disputes and people with guns and, don't have the cops around it. And you know what? I am so frustrated by the whole situation. I'm almost at the point of saying, go ahead, do it. Make the cops nothing more than Uber drivers. Let them drive the social workers around. And when the call comes in, let them take the social worker to the call. And then when they arrive, let them get out of the car. And the cops should just drop them off, like Uber, drop them off and pull away. Because clearly what happens is, the presence of the police inflames the situation so drastically. You're just precipitating the violence, right? You're making it a necessity that it has to be violence. Okay, you want to do it? Drop them off, make them an Uber car service. Get them to the scene quickly. You're in a marked police car. You got lights, you got sirens, whoop, whoop, the whole way through. Get there, get them. Don't even bother stopping the car. Just open the door and let them duck and roll. Just get out of the car. Go ahead, go deal with it. And come back later on and then see what happens.
Well, that may meet the political narrative for, certain mayors and certain demographics and what have you. But what about the business owners in those neighborhoods? In the past, your instructions for your local property managers or security directors was, listen, if you see something coming, reach out, call 911, call the authorities, let them deal with it. Then when this all started, it was like, maybe we need to have, if we're not going to get as quick a response because they may not have as many resources, maybe we need to look at private security, to supplement them, and whether they're armed or not armed. But then in a previous podcast, we talked about the legal ramifications, liabilities of that, because if something then does happen, they're not covered with the same indemnifications that public law enforcement is covered. Now we're looking at a situation where, whether or not they have the resources, they may have so many handcuffs on them for, what their engagement is, or elect not to show, even if they have the resources, because they don't want to inflame the situation, as you say. And now they're sending in effectively social workers into a very, very volatile environment where in no way, shape, or form do they have the training or experience to handle that. And if you think that there's, a few incidences, of improper conduct, by the police, wait till you see what happens then when you start sending in people that don't have that level of background and, and training. And caught in the middle are the CEOs and CISOs of corporate America. And it's just, hence the damned if you do and damned if you don't. So we can say a million different ways, what this slippery slope is leading to. We can all see it. I mean, the news is providing us example day after day after day. The reaction to anything, regardless of any kind of research into the details of exactly what happened in an incident, the riots are happening the next day and they go on for days. And we have to recognize what this is going to cost in the long run. And really, as we get into the solution, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself on the solution section, but this is not going in a good direction. And it's going to be very painful even getting there, even if it doesn't end well. So I think, everybody's got to take a step back, get the politics out of it. We're politicizing the virus, we're politicizing unrest and what have you, and lost in all of this, which is the impetus for why we came up with this show, of common sense, of come on. We have to apply some rational, logical common sense here. We can't abandon corporate America, to street gangs.
You mentioned the cost, right? And you think about, so with the clients, the last couple of weeks, we've been spending an incredible amount of time going through the properties, looking at them, trying to figure out what the game plan is going to be. If the riots break out, if it gets bad, how do you secure the facility? And in that planning process, we've actually looked at something that would be very similar to what an embassy being taken over would be. How do you get the security people out of there? How do you secure them, get them to a safe room? How do you make sure your systems are shut down? What do you do with the elevators? What do you do with the computer systems at the lobby desks? How do you handle all of those issues? And we spent weeks in the planning. And then you start thinking about, okay, well, how do we need, how do we provide security services for that? So you work with the security companies, guard companies that are providing security professionals at the desks. And you start thinking about, okay, well, normally on the overnight, I may have only one person. Now I'm going to have two people on, or I'm going to have three people on, or I have other exits and all the vulnerable exit locations within the property that are going to need to be covered because you may have people within the building. And the problems just start to compound themselves out. And the cost just becomes exponential. And there's no getting that money back. It's not run a sale and be able to, to earn that money back. It is a definite cost center. And I don't think that's something that's actually being looked at hard enough. I think obviously the CEOs are going to get hit with it. The CFOs are going to wind up seeing this. When you start doing, Q1 of next year, you're going to start looking at the numbers, and you're going to go, man, we spent this much. It definitely has a cumulative effect, and it is an issue that nobody that wants to address at this point. It's the knee jerk reaction. But with the private versus the public security, right? I mean, we had touched about it before. The issues that bring up between, armed versus unarmed. What do you do? And what do you bring into the building? If you were the CEO, how do you which way do you lean on that?
Well, let's take it one more level. It's not private versus public. It's private versus public versus neither. Because in some cases, you're going to be left without either one.
And I thought I was going to have to preface that and say to you, no, not what you would want to do, but what would you do?
None of
neither.
What do you do when you got none of the above? And because some companies may elect to not have the risks of armed private security. So at the very least, they've got, a skeleton, basically a crew just for first triage out there. But if they're not getting the backup of local law enforcement, then you really have no defense. And then you get into then the logistical planning then what do we do? And maybe that's because there's so much to talk about here on the logistics. Maybe that's a good point to take a break from this section and go into the logistics, because I can't wait to get there. You are listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by myself, Jim Henry, and Sal Lafreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com and to subscribe and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. So, logistics. I thought we'd never get there. So, what are your post orders then to your personnel? I mean, you've got a brick and mortar facility. You have assets to protect for the stockholders. You have your personnel to protect. And if your decision is going to be, we're not going to be confrontational and we don't think we're going to get backup from law enforcement, we're going to have a plan basically to retreat. Well, if retreating, at the very least, it's going to put your physical assets at risk, which then lends into, rethinking putting those $1 million pieces of art in the lobby and, what have you, because that's not a good place for that. But it also puts your employees and personnel at risk. And then that's another liability. So again, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you do, and you're damned if you don't.
Oh, it's true. We've been, again, in the planning stages the last couple of weeks, talking to clients, and some of them have asked, well, can we put armed guards in the lobby? And I went, sure, you could. And in most cases, you're at a minimum doubling your cost from the guard service to what you're going to pay for an armed guard, and especially in something like this, in a high risk, where they know that they're going to be getting themselves into the middle of trouble. You put the armed guard in the lobby, and would it be a good idea? Yeah, you can pay for it. Again, it goes back to the cost we were just talking about. Your costs are going to go up exponentially. And in reality, what are they going to do? If 100 people are outside looting and they start banging on the windows and break the windows and get into your facility, what are you supposed to do? 3 guys standing there with guns. Are they going to start firing warning shots? It goes back to what you brought up, the point of liability, right?
Right.
How do you have to come up with a plan. You got to be able to react to this, and you got to be able to try and limit the amount of liabilities that you have. The irony of it all, and the thing that really bothers me the most about this, is that we're writing plans today to be able to protect security. And the irony of that is security is there to protect the building. Right. So we're now giving up the building. If it really gets that bad, you can't leave 2 $17 an hour guards in the lobby of $1 billion property and expect them to defend the property. You can pay those guys $100 an hour. They're not going to defend the property if 100 people come crashing through the door, right? What do you do?
And the social media communications between the anarchists and the ones that are just looking to foment unrest for the sake of unrest because it satisfies a political narrative or something, beyond the issue of, whatever store that they're, attacking. I mean, so far what we've seen, is most of this has been aimed at smaller big box retail. It really hasn't had that much of an impact on the major corporations and corporate lobbies and what have you. And I guess, one of the few positives of the limited, on-premise employment, from COVID is that you don't have as many employees at risk. But, as we get out of COVID, and you're going to have a lot more utilization of public transportation, you're going to have much more in the way of, crowds on the street. and traffic into buildings. I fear that that's going to be another enriching target, as you have greater and greater personnel. And then they're going to look for, like terror. What do terrorists look for? They look for marquee sites to make a statement, right?
Yeah.
And then it really, accentuates, the exposure of damned if you do and damned if you don't, because then retreating, you've got thousands of people in your building, your employees that you're responsible for, plus visitors. And if you take any level of a stand to delay them, well, that's all well and good if the police are going to be right behind you, coming in once they know that they've got an altercation there. But man, if you can't count on that response coming in, either because of, like I say, a lack of resources, on the part of police, or the apathetic reaction of the cops, they're just they're fed up with being guilty till proven innocent on no matter what they do, even if it is just a fraction of a single % of those that are not following proper protocol. It impacts the morale of the whole department, and it's impacting the ability of them to hire good quality talent. So now you're going to lower the bar even further. And if you think you got problems, within police departments now where you got a few bad apples, when you start hiring people with a much lesser level of credentials and background because they're so desperate for personnel, that's only going to get worse.
Somebody came up with a statement a few weeks, months, whatever it was, that said that, 27 is the new 20, that, the level of maturity in people in the population, I guess the millennials or whatever, but a 27-year-old acts as a 20-year-old. And you think about it, if all of that works on a sliding scale, a person who's 21 years old joins the police department. What are you dealing with, a 16-year-old? And you're giving them all of this authority and power, and they're getting put into situations that just in normal circumstances, in a normal day-to-day operation, they find themselves in situations that you're just not really prepared for. When I went on the job, I was 24 years old, and there were times when I'd walk into a family dispute, and the person that, the cause of the family dispute was either a son or a daughter that wasn't too far away in age from me. And here I am supposedly trying to, settle the dispute out. And, you look at, and it kind of goes to what you were just saying, the level of person that you're going to get, I don't understand now with a lot of departments, they want you to have a college degree or at least an associate's degree. I don't understand where they're going to pick from that pool from. If there's somebody who's going to school and gets a college degree, I mean, do you really want to go into a police force? Do you want to deal with all of that? So they are going to, at some point, have to lower the standards to get there. And when you start lowering the standards and you get the younger age, it's a recipe for disaster.
Plus, you're even losing the group that could probably make more money in a different career path, but has some. Maybe there's a history, in the family of people being in law enforcement for a few generations. They understand that this is a good civic responsibility. They're actually doing something positive to protect the community. And, they look at the degradation and the taunting and the ridicule and, it has them do the double click rule on whether this is really something that should go to the third or fourth generation, within the family. It is not the kind of career path, that it's looked like for the past 100, 200 years.
And what they're losing is not even just the 20-year veterans, right? What they're losing now is the ones with 10 years, 15 years on. Guys and girls who aren't even staying the 20 years. And you think about it, if you come on the job at 21, 22 years of age and you get on the job and you do 10 years, you're 31. You've had 10 years in a law enforcement capacity with all of your training and everything else that you got behind you. You got 10 years of that experience, of that life experience. You're 31 years old. You can go to a company and work for another 20 years. Right? You can have, in essence, a whole nother career. If you were in and you were staying until, late 40s, early 50s, you're not starting a second career. So what's the problems that they're running into today in a lot of the departments is as soon as they can vest out, they're going. And now you just got this humongous gap in between the new people coming in and those that are just kind of sticking around to get their 20 and hoping that nothing happens. It's a tough situation, but that slightly takes us off the point of the problems that companies have, but
it lays the backdrop of the reality that they need to understand, is out there. And, looking ahead into the third segment here, we talk about the solutions. What can the CEOs do to address this? Because
cash in and go.
Yeah, they, unless they're just going to turn their businesses into a residential property and hightail it.
Even residential doesn't work.
Yeah,
these
even
days.
residential doesn't work.
You can't evict anymore. You can't evict. Oh, this is crazy.
Well, so I was anxious to get into the logistics section. I'm equally anxious to get into the solution section. So with that, I'll remind everybody you are listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and Sal Lavreri. We invite you to comment on our blog at theriskadvisor.com. So subscribe and follow us on our social media like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. If you are interested in having one or both of us speak at an upcoming event or would like to consult with us, please go to our webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. So the solutions. Is there a good answer here? Well,
No.
In one word, no, if we stay on the path that we're on. But not, every black cloud has a silver lining. And the way I would look at it is what we're witnessing here is a wake-up call to the CEOs that corporate America needs to look at this and recognize they can't be a catalyst to the direction that we are going. It is not in their best interest.
But let me ask you this. As a former CEO of a public company, and I think we may have touched on this in an earlier show, they're sort of torn between what the board of directors, their stockholders, right, that want them to that sort of mandate what they have to do. And in a lot of ways, and what we've seen is they've been forced to acquiesce to, in essence, extortion by a lot of these organizations, right, that are basically shaking them down under the guise of, whatever program they're pushing at the moment. But on the other side of it, you have to balance out the amount of liabilities that you have and that you're facing. And, you brought up the point with you have employees that you have to be able to protect. You have an obligation and a responsibility there, right? And we're not even talking about OSHA and all the other stuff that applies. So how does one actually balance those?
I think you can. I think you can recognize, that there are, look, there's issues in every walk of life, in every institution, in every company. No matter how good, there's bad people, and no matter how bad, there's good people. Same thing goes for law enforcement. You're not going to have 100%. I mean, the problem right now is, if you have 0.1%, that are misbehaving, they're just, we're highlighting that to a degree that's disproportionate to reality, and then trying to apply a paint roller to the whole, organization, or just saying we have to defund and completely change everything. That does not make any logical sense. You have to, I think corporate America can actively support reform and improvement, in law enforcement, but they have to stand firm on completely, defunding police or saying that they're just not needed, or just the presence of a uniformed police officer is too incendiary and whatnot. You just can't accept that. Then that's just going too far. And all that's going to do is make the slippery slope even slipperier and make this worse.
Well, that's been the problem, for a period of time, for a number of, in recent years, right? It's the selective enforcement of what laws they want to enforce, which ones they don't want to enforce. And it starts the ball rolling, and it gets you down into this, into this arena. With respect to, especially with the election and the potential violence that's coming up, more so than anything else, locking the doors is just not enough.
Right.
You really need to have a plan. You need to figure out what you're going to do.
Well, when you talk about selective enforcement, then that variability, is really what incites, even more problems. So let's relate it to something a little more enjoyable, like baseball, right? Where do you have the big fights in baseball? It's when the umpire is not being consistent calling balls and strikes, right? And that's really what it comes down to. Have a very clear set of rules of engagement, have very, very thorough training with accountability, to law enforcement to be following those rules. The police cameras, body cameras, which were originally a concern by the police unions and whatnot, which would be an invasion or hindering their ability to do their jobs, are now a law officer's, best friend. It highlights, the 0.1% that are misbehaving, but, it supports the 99.999%, of those that are doing a good job. It really requires, going back to those, fundamental basics and recognizing that throwing the baby out with the bathwater here is not a good idea. But and like I say, I think corporate America can take the lead to be progressively for, some reforms, but they have to be as vocal as well for, again, not going to the extreme and caving for some of the absolutely outlandish statements that I've heard made by some of completely, just going back to square zero, eliminating the entire department, starting from scratch.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that they find themselves in a situation where if they did come out and vocalized about any of the planning processes and what they're anticipating and what they want to do, that they'd be chastised for it. And I think that's where they have to draw the line, is to understand that they may come out and, look, everything you do today gets criticized, no matter what, right? It does not matter. It gets criticized, but they have to draw that line that says, I'm going to put a plan in place. I'm going to do some planning. And, they'll get criticism over it, but why do you think you need it? You don't need it. You're being racial by doing it. You're profiling, all of these things. And the reality is they need to have a plan in place, because the liabilities that they're going to face in absence of it is incredible. We thought early on that we would see an increase in lawsuits with COVID. We're starting to see that now with, what did you know and when did you know it and what did you do? Some of the vaporware technology that was deployed is going to get challenged. Ultimately they're going to be, put on the hot seat for it. And I think we got the same thing is going to happen now, where you're going to have a lack of planning for fear that it's going to seem like you're becoming a law enforcement agency, or, you're trying to develop your own private force, is going to wind up causing them to be liable for a lot of issues.
Right.
It's not fun.
The other shows that we've done, we generally have some, fairly tangible, either technological solutions or evolution of technological solutions that are pretty good, round peg into a round hole for a problem. This is all cultural. This is, it's I say I long for the purest background of when I was, getting my engineering degree and whatnot, and, initially working in the security industry on the technical side. The law of physics is not subjective. It's very clear, what works and what doesn't work. And you just adapt those, to the problems that you have in the field. This is just so much form over function, with regards to how to deal with these problems. It needs leadership. It needs leadership both on the public side with the elected officials, and having half the elected officials out there basically staying mum to this, or refusing to talk to it because they feel it might interfere with political agenda. And that's just, we have to be aligned. We have to be together on this. The elected officials, the law enforcement community, and corporate America all need to be in sync to show a consensus and leadership to the rank and file. Otherwise, the rank and file is going to figure, okay, we're going to take matters into our own hands. Nobody, you guys aren't giving us a plan or a solution or a collaboration that we think makes sense. So we're just going to go and raise it up a notch.
Yeah, I think All of that is true. And I think from the, from a risk advisory perspective, corporations and corporate leadership is going to have to recognize that there are liabilities there that they're going to have to address. And, it's the old pay me now, pay me later kind of thing. It's going to come. But in the end, right, you mentioned before, brick and mortar, there's no real solid policies. We look at COVID, we got closes, we got taxes are being increased. So really, what's so bad?
Oh, that's quite a picture, That's quite a picture. It's, well, as the Marines say, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And this is definitely a test of that cliche,
I'm reminded by when I first got into a detective squad, there was a situation where there was like over 300 shots were fired. This running gun battle. It went almost like a quarter of a mile, half a mile. It was just this long, big case that went on. And it was a senior detective that had gotten it. And it had happened just before I got there. And so I get to the squad and I'm talking to him one night. We're having a cup of coffee. And I said to him, so let me ask you, when you get something like that, where do you start? And he looked at me dead in the eye and he said, where do you start? I said, kid, your first thought should be, how do I end this?
Right.
He said, you don't want to, where do you start? How do I put an end to this?
Right.
And that's where we are today.
That's a very good perspective. Yep.
How do we put an end to this?
But you know what? It starts with consensus from all those stakeholders that I just mentioned saying that we do need to end it. Because if you can't it's one thing about how to end it. But if you can't get consensus from elected officials and law enforcement and corporate America that it's got to end, you'll never get the negotiation and compromise on the logistics, to improve the situation.
It's true. All right, we're gonna end this at this right here. So you've been listening to the Risk Advisor podcast hosted by Jim Henry and me, Sal LaFreri. We're going to ask you to subscribe to the show and like us on our social media sites like Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're going to remind you and ask you if you're interested in having one or both of us at an upcoming event, either virtually or in person, or would like to consult with us, please go to the webpage at theriskadvisor.com to set that up. Remember, you can hear the show on your favorite podcast platform, YouTube, and of course, stream it at theriskadvisor.com. Thanks again for listening, and we hope you tune in next week.